Hello, I'm Estelle Matthews and welcome to Food for Thought, the show that invites thought leaders and experts from the food industry to share their insights on sustainability. Meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of tomorrow brings its own challenges, questions and opportunities. But putting people and planet at the heart of the food industry is essential for a sustainable world and business. We'll be hearing from people from all areas of food retail and grocery who've been making strides in sustainability, leading change from the front and inspiring others to do so. Join us as we listen to a variety of stories and perspectives that are food for thought.
It's imperative that organisations in this space are making active steps to ensure that the consumer is well informed and they can make their choices knowingly, really, in terms of where that product has come from, how it's been produced, how it's travelled to their dinner tables.
Technology has a really important power here, and if we use it well, it can really improve the situations and it can really support these companies to be more sustainable.
It's for everyone's success if the retailer gets it right.
Companies from every industry are facing increasing calls from their consumers, investors and employees to transition to more sustainable business practices. From increasing energy efficiency and switching to renewable energy sources to reducing packaging and encouraging recycling and reuse, the opportunities and risks organisations take today will be key to their long-term sustainable growth. However, in an ever-changing world with a multitude of external factors, from a fluctuating economy to conflicts and climate events, true sustainability has its challenges. I'm Estelle Matthews, and today I'm joined by NSF's Craig Adams and Dr. Sarah Regis to talk about the food retail business, how it can embrace sustainability beyond buzzwords and pave the way for a greener, more resilient industry. Let's start by hearing about our guests. Briefly, Craig, tell us about your background and what led you to doing the work you do today.
Thanks, Estelle. My name's Craig and I'm a chartered environmental health practitioner, having worked in a range of environments over my 20 plus years career so far. I started out in local government many moons ago, and from that have worked for large global catering companies and a range of consultancies before arriving at NSF 9 years ago. I'm the Client Technical Director at NSF in the UK retail team. So a lot of my clients are found within the retail space, the hospitality sector, and indeed the leisure sectors as well. So I have a range of responsibilities managing the strategic direction of our client relationships with organisations in those respective sectors.
And where are you based, Craig?
I am based out of our UK office, which is located in Oxfordshire, and I reside in West London.
It's always helpful for our listeners because we have a global perspective in this podcast. So Sarah, where are you? I believe you're based somewhere in Belgium.
Yes, I'm in our new offices in Diegem, and myself, I live in Brussels. We are really close to Brussels, actually.
Thank you, Sarah. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you came to this, a little bit about your background.
I started in NSF in January. I'm pretty new on the team. I'm the Senior Global Manager for the regulatory team. My background is I'm a biologist. I'm a doctor in biology. And then 10 years ago, I moved to the regulatory affairs sectors. I'm specialized in the packaging legislations. And here I'm leading the team global, but I also have a various experience in working for different, ethic companies, and I also worked for manufacturer. Our main client are retailers and also the food industry.
Thank you. So both of you will have an interesting perspective on the discussion topic of today. And looking into food retail, we have to specifically look at it as one of the top 5 industries currently generating the highest level of greenhouse gases, and that's globally per year. Why do you think it's struggling so much with sustainability? Craig?
An interesting question, and I think that some of that is largely driven by its supply chain within the sector. So whereas grocers themselves in their scope 1 and 2 emissions may not necessarily be the sort of major contributors to greenhouse gas. I think there's been a number of articles written that show that the downstream supply chain is one of the major contributors to that. And I think that's because of the complexity of the sector itself. Just think about where your products in your fridge come from. And us here in Western Europe, yes, there's an element of produce that's grown on our doorstep, but a large proportion of that product probably travels long distances across the world in order to get there. So I think that whilst many steps have been taken to try and reduce that global greenhouse gas emission linked to the sector, there's still work to be done. But I think a lot of it stems from the fact that the supply chain itself is quite lengthy, very diverse, and is a global one.
So, Sarah, what work do you think there is to be done? Well, why are we struggling? What's your perspective?
As Greg mentioned, it's very difficult to do so. I see some initiative here in Belgium where you have more and more local, would say, new players, new retailers who are trying to set new alternatives, shops where they are sourcing the product more locally. And when I say locally, is they limited themselves to Europe. In that case, indeed, you lower your emissions, but you won't have access to everything. If you want strawberry in December, obviously it won't be possible. That means the consumer has also to be aware of these choices and also change the consumption's habits that they have and we say consume more local, more seasonal products.
Well, the food industry represents 25% of all greenhouse gas emissions. There needs to be some pretty important measures taken very quickly to be able to combat this, Craig, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And I think that, there are businesses out there. Certainly I look to sort of major supermarkets here in the UK and indeed other food businesses. And there are active steps that are underway. Most large organisations operating within the retail grocery space and indeed in the wider food industry now have corporate social responsibility statements which incorporate elements of environmental aspects to them. Of course, this is one of the key points within that we're talking about today. They've set some targets. I guess it's moving to meet those targets. So relatively speaking, I think that most organisations are still fairly early on that journey to reduce emissions. But what I think is encouraging is that there is a plan there. There does appear to be, embedded strategies within organisations. And now it's a question of time in order to get to those targets that they've set themselves. So, yeah, I think that perhaps starting as an industry may be slightly slower than other industries, but at the same time, good progress is being made. Organisations are publicising their results, sharing with their consumers what they're actively doing to try and reduce these greenhouse emissions. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's all sort of doom and gloom. I think there are some green shoots of success out there, and it's enforcing and reinforcing those even further as time goes by. So yeah, not all discouraging.
Sarah, do you think progress is being made and quick enough? And also, as part of that, can food businesses navigate a sea of change and still stay focused on the environment?
Actually, we do, in our day-to-day, we do assist clients when they want to use an alternative raw materials, and we support them by changing the recipe to have a more sustainable approach, by keeping also the specification of the product. And I mean, if it's done fast enough, I think the difficulties here is that you need to source for the new raw materials. You have to find more sustainable alternatives. And as Greg mentioned, is the supply chain might be very difficult because you have to have the appropriate supply chain to support your change. And I think that's where the retailers may struggle here. But when they have I would say a plant-based or most sustainable raw materials, alternative which are good for the environment and also for the consumer, by also keeping the taste of the food would say the same, if not better. When they do so, we support them really to implement the change and to make sure that they meet the requirement and they have the proper labeling and the proper informations on the label for the consumer.
So I'm hearing you say, Sarah, that there are supply chain issues, and also it's potentially hard for businesses to be in and remain environmentally sustainable. Is that right?
Yes, I think it's a challenge for them, and also because as a consumer, you may want your food to cost the same price, and they also have to integrate this into account. And if it's more expensive, it has to be somehow justified. And I think that could be also an issue toward the changes.
So Craig, let's try and narrow this down a bit. What do you think are the top challenges food companies need to overcome to keep their sustainability targets actually on track?
Great question, Estelle. I think there's many factors here that are driving what may be perceived as obstacles to achieving sort of better sustainability. And first, when I look at the UK market, rising costs, rising energy prices, they are particularly challenging. We've seen a number of businesses, not just within the food retail sector, but in the wider food sector in the UK, having to shutter their business because of spiraling costs. And that's both from a energy perspective, but also from a food cost perspective as well. So, that is particularly challenging for businesses. We've obviously experienced some labour difficulties here in the UK in the last 5 to 6 years, certainly post Brexit. And again, it's a factor that a lot of businesses are having to live with the legacy of that, particularly in this sector. And I guess that stems from the producers, the manufacturers and the growers out there that are finding labour quite difficult to access. But then that flows through the chain up to the retailers themselves, and they're not immune to some of those challenges. So, but I think that the real challenge, I guess, for a lot of these businesses is not necessarily looking at sustainability as a cost, but as a way of perhaps reducing some of those costs as a saving mechanism. We've seen some examples of organisations in this space who have really focused on energy consumption, and that has actually probably returned a saving of what they were spending on energy, because they've had to introduce new technologies within their business, new refrigeration techniques, etc., that may have come from other industries that have been utilised within the food retail sector. So again, as per my earlier answer, I think that there are opportunities, and when you are faced with challenges as an organisation, that puts you almost into survival mode to try and find alternatives. I think that there are alternative energy sources, ways of reducing energy consumption, alternative packaging, and that arguably drives innovation. So I do think that there is certainly some challenges to be faced, but I do think that there are some innovative approaches that businesses are adopting in order to become more sustainable.
Craig, you gave us a couple of really good examples of challenges that bigger companies have faced, like refrigeration and energy consumption. Could you give us any names, or are there any winners out there that are really, really making their mark?
It's relatively early doors. I think that there's obviously a number of organisations. Many of the larger supermarkets here in the UK are adapting, and their refurbishment cycles to take advantage of perhaps some of those newer technologies that are coming in. So, most of the top 5 supermarkets are looking at that approach, and that has, many benefits.
And Sarah, who do you think are the real winners? Who do you think is doing a great job in trying to be more sustainable?
Actually, I think we have pretty good players. As I would say, the main retailers worldwide, I would say companies like Whole Foods. I would say not the company because it was acquired by Amazon, but Whole Food supermarket, Trader Joe's in the US, like Carrefour here, it's also making a lot of efforts. The Ocean Groups in France. And as I said, we have also here a local company, which are the Colruyt groups as well. Yeah, we have quite good players. And I think, they really try to make this effort and try to really change and integrate the sustainability into their management and into their program system.
Oh, that sounds really positive. And just mentioning external factors, as Craig did earlier, he was talking about refrigeration and energy consumption. Are there any other external factors that present the main risks to businesses that you're talking about when it comes to sustainability?
I think the political situations is also a big factor because it can affect the resources and the availability of these resources. I think that's for me one of the major issue.
So you're thinking, for example, the war in Ukraine and the impact that's had on cereal prices one example.
And also the climate change, because if it's too warm in some areas, you can have a shortage on the productions. If you have floating issues, I think the climate also have a big impact. And actually, we can see from the recent events that can really be impactful on the resources.
So, Craig, in terms of, we're talking about external factors here, from war through to economic changes. How do you believe these impact sustainability practices?
Well, they have a massive impact. I think, whilst consumers and investors will put pressure on organisations in order to potentially be more sustainable, a lot of this is derived from regulation, and that is the political will of the government in these countries of the day. So I do think that has a major impact. We've seen over recent years that as part of the environmental conventions that have happened, COP, for example, that there's been certain governments that have rowed back on some of their previously agreed commitments. Consumers as well. I think, we've seen, certainly in the UK, far more consumers take an interest in sustainability issues, and they make those conscious choices when they decide where to go and purchase their food. And a lot of that is derived from what certain retailers are committing to and promoting on their labels when it comes to sustainability, be that animal welfare, be that where fish is sourced from, as an example. So there's lots of consumer influence over the direction of travel that the retailers will take.
And it's important for the retailers themselves who embrace sustainability initiatives that they can understand they'll be advancing social responsibility, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, yes. I think sort of playing to the general awareness amongst populations, the fact that lots of these resources are finite, and we have to be, everyone is a custodian to a lesser or greater extent. So it's imperative that that organisations in this space are making active steps to ensure that the consumer is well informed, and they can make their choices knowingly, really, in terms of where that product has come from, how it's been produced, how it's travelled to their dinner tables.
Thanks. So how we get there is the big question. What role can technology, for example, play in keeping sustainability on track? Sarah, your thoughts on technology?
I think technology is really supporting, because actually it helps you to find alternative raw materials, for example, like new sources of proteins, new sources of fat, that could help. Also, automatizations of productions can help to support better labor policy. I think really technology can be a plus here, and also I think AI is a big challenge now, and why not using AI to optimize the low emission? Yeah, I think technology has a really important power here, and can really, if we use it well, it can really improve the situations, and it can really support these companies to be more sustainable. I think it's really as I said, well used can be a really a good actor for the changes.
So, Craig, have you seen any big wins as a result of technological advances, especially in grocery retail?
Yeah, I think let's take a look at the logistics side of things. I think a lot of logistical supply chain organisations are now running on biofuel. So again, that's something that maybe 20 years ago wouldn't have been commonplace. It is far more commonplace now. So that sort of recycling of oil that's used in the industry, sort of lower emissions that are derived from that, as opposed to sort of typical fossil fuels. So that is one example where this has really sort of made an impact. And I think if you look at some of the more sort of novel techniques that are being utilised, for example, vertical farming, we know that one of the biggest contributors in terms of emissions is the fact that we use so much land and water for our farming. So better irrigation, using vertical as opposed to more traditional farming techniques. These are all sort of ways in which represent a more sustainable way of farming going forward. So yeah, things like that have made a real impact. It's still in their infancy, I would add, but increasingly more commonplace. And I think that's an area that will just continue to, pardon the pun, grow.
And do you have a sense of the drive for energy efficiency across your client base? Craig, perhaps you could take that one.
Absolutely. And I think that, obviously that's been heavily influenced with the rise in energy costs that we've seen over recent years, particularly since the conflict in Ukraine commenced 2 years ago. So absolutely, I think there's a drive to perhaps redesign businesses. We've seen a lot of our clients adopt different models of business, perhaps reducing floor space within their new build operations to what it was previously. And I think that the refocus on water consumption has also been quite significant. So again, capturing grey water, can that be used in other parts of the business? Obviously not impacting on food safety or the health and safety of employees in any way, shape or form, but still, capturing rainwater and utilising that for maybe washing down external areas of a business, or indeed watering gardens and associated greenery around the perimeter of environments. So, yeah, I think there's been a real drive to try and reduce energy consumption, and that's been displayed in a number of different ways across many businesses. So, yeah, I think that there is still that appetite if it gives that return on investment, which obviously that is the one of the major factors in making a sensible economic decision, but also one that aligns with the sustainability policies and procedures of the organisations in question.
So some creative and long-term approaches really here. Is it difficult, do you think, to measure results? I mean, is this one of the problems facing grocery retailers, for example? Is it the struggle to measure their results as they go along in their journey of sustainability?
Difficult, but not impossible, and that's something that we assist a number of our client organisations with. We have software that tracks energy consumption, carbon usage through modelling, and so it's not easy. And again, as with many things, it's about having data and having that data available. But yes, it's something that we at NSF are supporting many of our clients with, and something that I think is becoming increasingly less burdensome than perhaps it was, again, 5-10 years ago.
Sarah, how can food and drink manufacturers adopt a proactive approach to sustainability in a way that you believe contributes to future sustainability, so that long-term piece?
I think by choosing alternatives ingredients in their formulations, it's like one way to go, but also have a more sustainable production line. Craig mentioned the energy. I think if they improve their sources of energy, have a more sustainable energy provider, or having solar panels or other alternatives, that's a way to go. But I would say as a first actions is to find alternatives to their raw materials and formulations, and that's actually what we observed as an action taken by the food and the beverage industry.
And are you, Sarah, seeing businesses actually using goals and targets to help ensure resilience in the face of this change and this kind of baseline approach?
Yeah, I think they do, and sometimes they also, because it's like the green watching approach is that they really try, because it has a marketing value to also be more green. Also, we haven't mentioned this so far, but the packaging also, an alternative to your packaging, having a more sustainable packaging is also a way to go. Then the formulation, it's one indication. The packaging that you're using is also another one. And here in Europe, it's strongly encouraged by the government, because there is a discussions to prevent greenwashing. In these discussions, this new requirement for ESG, that the company has to report their sustainability approach. Yeah, I think it goes into two directions: from the company itself, from the consumer who wants something different, and also from the government who are passing law in that directions to really support the changes.
So pushing you here, Sarah, that you're saying that retailers can no longer get away with greenwashing. Is that to do with regulatory change, or can you explain further?
Actually, say for the auditor, what is a greenwashing? Is like the way to promote that you are green and you have an action on sustainability, when it's not really defined and is more seen as a marketing approach than really a proper actions. And European governments would like to change this approach by regulating the claims, like what you are able to claim, and what is beyond these claims. Actually, it's just a plan to have a proper legislation. It hasn't been in place. I would say it again, I mean, for me, everything is back to the consumer, is that, okay, how we convince them that we are better. Like beyond the world, I think people are waiting for actions.
Thank you. Well, let's talk more about regulatory change. Craig, how do you believe food retail companies can get ahead of all the red tape, as it were?
I think it's a multi-stakeholder approach. I think, lots of organisations, particularly the larger ones, have significant sort of technical in-house resource that they will utilise. But again, it might be that some smaller organisations with less technical resource availability at their disposal, may look to organisations such as ourselves in order to help and support them as they you rightly said, get ahead of regulatory change. So understanding what the basic legal benchmark is, but also how do they sort of future plan beyond that minimum regulatory standards. So yes, I think looking at your supply chain, engaging with all aspects of that supply chain within an organisation, which I am confident that most large retailers would do currently. There perhaps may still be room for improvement with some of the medium and smaller retailers in that regard. So engaging with them, understanding what some of the pressure points are within the supply chain, and then future planning through supply chain mapping, and understanding where the risks are and how those risks could impact that business. So yeah, I think it's obviously being very well connected and having good sources of information and truth that you can rely on when you need it.
Really helpful. So there's a part of the equation we've not really touched on, and that's personal behaviours and mindset. And that's both inside the company and the clients that you deal with, and amongst consumers, which surely has an impact on the success of sustainability practices in the food industry. So how do your clients garner this success for optimum outcomes? What are they doing?
We've seen the rise of apps, and that is a great way of communicating with your consumer base, and understanding what is important to them, and how that impacts their decision making. And organisations are actively reaching out to their consumer base in order to collect and gather that information so that they can make strategic decisions on the way that they travel as an organisation. So absolutely, I think in this age of communication, more and more organisations that I work with are switching to the ability to sort of capture that information through direct questioning of their consumers, short surveys, whatever it may be, in terms of how that's channeled to them. That there are regular dialogue and interface with consumers, and also picking up on social media trends. If consumers are including a brand within a tweet or within an Instagram post, it's having the ability to sort of capture and aggregate that data and try and understand what that means. Is that a sustainability related issue? If so, how do we capture that and use that within our future strategy? So yeah, lots of very sophisticated ways that businesses are, or appear to be, reaching out at the moment and gathering public and consumer opinion.
I think, the retailers obviously listen to their consumers, and they have to respond to the demand and also the change of consumption habits. I think, right now, one cannot ignore the other. They need to work together and take both sides into considerations. The retailer has issues for maintaining some cost and high competition in that sector, and the consumer want probably something different, and the retailer has to respond to that, and they can't ignore this as well.
Oh, sorry, I'd just like to add on to that, Estelle, if I may. I think that, obviously there is the consumer, but there's also many other stakeholders within that supply chain. And increasingly, I see organisations reaching out to their supply chain to look to them for innovation and ideas on how they can win together. And I think that is vitally important going forwards. I think we've moved away from perhaps having less integrated supply chains, where there was very much a consumer, be that a retailer, a hospitality organisation, whoever it may be, and their suppliers. I think everybody seems to be working together, certainly from what I see, as one, as a more sort of holistic ecosystem going forwards, because I think, it's for everyone's success if the retailer gets it right, but that is heavily influenced by the ability of the supplier within that chain as much as it is with the consumer. So I do think being a little bit more holistic and welcoming of ideas and innovations from suppliers as opposed to just looking at what the consumer wants.
Craig, Sarah, thank you for your thoughts. So put simply, the fact of the matter is that the road to sustainability in retail is filled with hurdles, and it's all at once a competitive area and a place for inventive problem solving, ensuring businesses can last.
The speaker views are their own and may not necessarily reflect the views of NSF or any of its affiliates.